walks into a room in Montecito, most people clear out of it if they own private planes. And when people who own private planes hear that Meghan is on the phone, they refuse to take her calls. I know this from people who are friends of mine who...
Meghan Markle, as previously having been a, quote, yacht girl, there have been more revelations going viral from the past. And I want to show you this. Claims this has now been going viral this week, Lady C. I'll get your reaction off the back, but let's just watch this together.
Meghan, including that she was a yacht girl. That's right. It's mentioned in the book. Harry knows only too well that it has received wide publicity. Whether it is true or not is beside the point. That Meghan used to entertain as a yacht girl. Lady C, why do you think Meghan Markle hasn't sued anyone in regard to her yacht girl and porn videos exposés? You need to know who you're going to sue before you decide you're going to sue someone.
Oh, he seems to be. And it seems like that lady is a temptress. She's a siren. She's lured him into the rocks.
I haven't heard that term in a while. She's a harlot, almost.
She's, well, harlot's bad, right? She's just powerful. She's...
Actually, that's a good point. Harlot and temptress.
Yeah, I think harlots are.
It's like comparing melons to apples.
The definition of a harlot is a prostitute.
Yeah, that's a whole word.
I take that back.
Yeah.
It's a terror.
Yeah, I don't think she's that.
No.
No. Wasn't there some speculation that she was on Epstein's yacht at one point in time? There was like photos with her and Prince Andrew way back in the day when she was like in her early 20s.
Wow.
Reputations do not typically fracture under the weight of a single catastrophic event or a verified document leaked to the press. They do not shatter because of a shouting match or a scandalous headline that burns brightly for a day and then vanishes into the ether of the news cycle. Instead, reputations crack when the lens through which we view them is fundamentally altered, forcing the public to reinterpret everything they thought they understood about a person's history. That is precisely how this specific narrative began to unravel. It did not start with a court filing or a breaking news banner on a major network. It started with a phrase that simply refused to die. For weeks, and then months, royal commentator Lady Campbell sat in front of a camera and repeated the same two words regarding Meghan Markle. She did not shout them. She did not deliver them with the manic energy of an internet conspiracy theorist or the vitriol of a scorned rival. She said them calmly, publicly, and consistently on the record. There was no outrage in her delivery, nor was there any attempt to escalate the rhetoric. There was only consistency, and it is that specific consistency that made the narrative dangerous. When a story explodes due to new evidence, there is a clear battlefield where facts can be disputed.
Why do I have to mention Twitter accounts that have that word? I'm gonna get sued. I'm gonna lose my YouTube channel. Moon bump overseas. My God, I said that. A summer 62 boomer. She's still not sued the Enquirer. And I don't know how I'm gonna...
But when a story explodes because repetition changes interpretation, the battlefield becomes much harder to define. Suddenly, the public discourse shifted away from arguments about personality traits, fashion choices, or family squabbles. Instead, people began rechecking timelines. They started re-examining access. They began asking questions about the mechanics of an ascent that had previously been accepted as a modern fairy tale. Then something unexpected occurred, or rather, failed to occur. In the face of a persistent, damaging label that strikes at the very core of a public figure's origin story, one expects a swift, decisive shutdown. One expects a cease and desist letter, a defamation lawsuit, or, at the very least, a furious denial issued through a spokesperson. Instead, there was silence. And when a label is loaded as this one is allowed to stick, silence ceases to look like dignity. It begins to look like confirmation. For years, Lady Campbell has occupied a very specific, somewhat singular niche in the landscape of royal commentary. She is not a viral agitator chasing algorithms, nor is she a shock jock looking for sound bites. She operates as a steady, old-school observer who understands the intricate machinery of power, protocol, and perception. She is not known for emotional outbursts or sloppy reporting. This is exactly why her approach to this particular allegation caught the attention of those who understand how media actually works. There was no dramatic accusation, no sudden reveal of a smoking gun. There was simply the application of a label, repeated with the steady drip of water on stone. Outrage burns hot and fast. It triggers defensive mechanisms in the audience and invites dismissal from supporters. Repetition, however, does something entirely different. It reshapes context. When a phrase is repeated without panic, without exaggeration, and without distinct malice, it begins to feel less like an attack and more like a description. It transforms from a slur into a categorization. This is the subtle art of how narratives are quietly rewritten. Accusations demand proof, but labels invite reinterpretation. And reinterpretation spreads infinitely faster than any rumor because it does not ask the audience to believe a new fact. It asks them to rethink what they already accepted as true. This marked the pivotal shift in the cultural conversation surrounding Meghan Markle. Suddenly, the debate was no longer about whether the commentator was being fair or mean-spirited. The question became why this particular phrase kept surfacing, why it wasn't being neutralized by a litigious team known for suing over letters and privacy breaches, and why it wasn't fading away like so many other tabloid rumors do. The repetition made the label adhere to the subject. Once it stuck, it began doing the heavy lifting on its own, reshaping timelines, reframing the nature of her access to high society, and unsettling a story that had relied on a very specific, romantic origin arc. What made this label particularly lethal wasn't necessarily the accusation of moral wrongdoing, but what the label replaced. The term, yacht girl, acts as a narrative shortcut. It is not framed as a crime.
Royals, that's not how you treat family. Okay, I don't care if she married in, they moved to a different continent, she has done nothing but dine out on her titles and try to stretch that brief 18 months she spent over there. And shame on Meghan Markle because the Royals, they welcomed her with open arms. They threw her a big wedding. They basically said, do whatever you want. If you have this initiative you're passionate about, you want to do a cookbook with the Grenfell girls, whoever they were, do that. But she did not think that was good enough and she absconded to California and then proceeded to accuse them all of racism with really no facts, and really there was no veracity to any of her claims.
Nor is it a legal charge. It functions as a skeleton key that unlocks a different version of the past. Shortcuts are powerful because they do not tell people what to think, they tell people how to process information. Instead of accusing Meghan of a specific transgression, the label quietly challenges the story she has sold for years. The familiar arc was clean, compelling, and cinematic. A struggling, biracial actress gets a chance breakthrough, engages in humanitarian work, and stumbles into a love story that lifts her into a stratosphere she never planned to enter. It was a story of accidental ascent, governed by fate, timing, and the alignment of the stars. The Yacht Girl shortcut reframes that arc without needing to argue against it point by point. It suggests that access preceded opportunity. It implies that proximity to power was not an accident, but a transaction, and that certain exclusive rooms were entered long before the public noticed the door opening. Once that idea is planted in the collective consciousness, the rise no longer feels spontaneous. It feels structured. It feels engineered. That is why the phrase lands with more weight than a typical insult. Insults bounce off the armor of celebrity. This phrase, however, uproots the foundation of the biography. People stop debating her character and start revisiting the chronology of her life. They stop asking, is this fair? And start asking, does this explain the gaps? That is a much harder question to shut down because it doesn't require hard proof, only plausibility. The most destabilizing aspect of this reframing is that nothing new has to be added to the historical record for it to work. The same public milestones remain in place. The same interviews exist on YouTube. The same gaps in her resume are still there. But the order feels different. The meaning shifts. When the audience looks backward through this new lens, timelines that once felt harmless suddenly appear strategic. Moments that were brushed off as networking now feel calculated. Trips that were never fully explained become focal points of intense curiosity. Professional gaps that once blended into the background stop feeling invisible and start feeling like redacted files. This is the mechanism of reframing. It reorders existing facts into a new pattern. When people hear the same label repeated calmly by a credible source, they begin scanning the past for patterns that might support it, not because they have been convinced by evidence, but because the new frame gives them a reason to look. Once that process of retrospective investigation starts, it is nearly impossible to stop. Public suspicion does not grow in courtrooms. It grows in the quiet recognition of patterns. Humans are evolutionarily wired to connect dots, even when those dots have been sitting in plain sight for years. When a new lens is applied, coincidence begins to look like design. This is why timelines are so vulnerable to this kind of attack. Biographies rely on trust, on the assumption that what wasn't explained didn't need to be explained. But once access becomes the primary question, unexplained moments feel heavier. The silence around them feels intentional. For Meghan Markle, this shift was catastrophic because her public rise depended entirely on a clean sequence of before and after, a struggle followed by a breakthrough. When that sequence gets scrambled, the story loses its certainty. And certainty is the only thing that keeps a public narrative stable. Without it, people don't need evidence to feel uneasy. They just need enough unanswered questions to sense that the pieces do not fit together as they were told. This brings us to the response, or rather, the lack thereof, which became a story in itself. When damaging stories are truly false and baseless, the response pattern from high-profile figures is usually predictable and swift. There is a denial, a firm statement, a clear legal line drawn in the sand that signals confidence and shuts the door before speculation can calcify into belief. Speed matters in PR because speed communicates certainty. That did not happen here. There was no immediate denial. There was no decisive shutdown. There was no simple statement calling the claim a fabrication. Instead, the response arrived sideways, filtering through friendly reporters, whispers, and strategic noise. There is talk of lawyers being consulted, hints of legal options being explored, and signals sent without anything officially landing on a docket. That absence of direct action spoke louder than any press release ever could have. In the court of public opinion, hesitation does not read as calm. It reads as calculation.